A pleasant day to each and everyone. Today we will be having BSEE 25 Language Programs and Policies in Multilingual Society. We are now down into Lesson 3, Implementation of the Bilingual Education Policy. So from our previous lesson, you are already familiar with the BEP or the Bilingual Education Policy. In this presentation, you will be identifying the guidelines and policies how to follow the BEP. And once again, for this subject, I am Ms. Loveline D. Baes, your instructor. So let's start with our review from the timeline since this will be the basis of this presentation, which is the 1987 Constitution. And this says, ang wikang pambansa ay Filipino. And then from this Constitution, there are different guidelines to follow. And from that, this is DO 54 series of 1987 implementing guidelines for the 1987 policy on bilingual education. So bear with this presentation because this will be very worthy since we are talking about the guidelines or the department order coming from our government. And we don't need to revise, paraphrase those information since this came from their order. So the first one, or the first policy that we will be talking about is in the consonance with the 1987 policy on bilingual education, the Department of Education, Culture and Sports, or the DEX before, and today, or in our current time, this is the DepEd, hereby promulgates the following implementing guidelines. So under this policy, we will be having 13 guidelines to follow. So let's start with the letter A. Bilingual education is defined operationally as the separate use of Filipino and English as a media of instruction in specific subject. The separate use of Filipino and English for instruction should be observed. Okay, once again, in our case or in different cases of teaching or using these languages in instruction, it differs, no, with the preference of the teacher and our students. But based on the guidelines coming from our government, coming from DepEd, and of course, in line with CHED, we need to use separate or we need to use this separately. But again, once again, we need to take into consideration the different dialects that we are having in our country. And then also from our previous lesson, I also presented the different subjects under or that must be under Filipino language and that are must be under English language. And for the second one, letter B, reading in the regional languages in Filipino and in English shall be achieved in stages. In non-Tagalog speaking areas, Filipino may be taught orally using procedures, techniques, and materials needed for teaching Filipino to non-Tagalog speakers. So for this case, since we still have elementary or the primary, secondary, and then the tertiary or the basic education from the tertiary or college, we still need to have facing in teaching these languages, like what we had experienced during our elementary days. Our primary teachers from grades 1 to 3, if I'm not mistaken, they are focusing on our comprehension about the language. For example, they provide us different stories that we need to read. English or Filipino are available with our primary teachers. But then again, there are leveling or there are stages on how we can grasp the language that we are needing. Once again, for example, you're from different parts of the Philippines and you don't have the mother tongue or Filipino is not your mother tongue, you still need to learn the Filipino language or what we are used to know na Tagalog. No, for example, you are Waray, still you need to know how to use the Filipino language since that is our mother tongue. And then, of course, eventually, the English language. Next one is the phasing in of two or three languages shall be planned at the regional level, provided that bilingual instruction, the use of Filipino and English as media of instruction, shall be implemented in all region. Again, this guideline is into or related with the letter B, since still it still talks about the phasing of teaching it. And once again, it depends on the preference of the school, how they're going to teach the different languages that we need to have, since they do also have the right to use their preferred language in teaching, but still they need to follow the guidelines given by our government. Next to this is content learning in whatever language should not be sacrificed because of the variation in the phasing in of the language. So for example, our teacher before during our elementary days, the content or the translation of the messages of the information coming from what they are teaching us must not be compromised. Okay, so it comes with the translation itself. Again, the phasing of teaching language must not compromise the content learning, because at some point, at some cases, it must be rare, but there are cases na the translation itself do not give the proper meaning or content of the learning itself from the teacher to the students. Once again, the purpose is defeated if they didn't give what is the proper content of that teaching. Again, that will not be effective. Next one, for all subjects to be taught in Filipino, the development of teaching and reference materials as well as the training of teachers to teach in Filipino shall be funded. Actually, since I do not have the experience teaching in a public school or in a secondary public school, I'm not yet familiar with the trainings funded by the government for the teachers, but I heard it from my friends coming from public school teachers. They're already public school teachers, and then I already overheard about it that they have trainings and seminars, and for this case, no, webinars, and I think last week they do have inset, 5 day inset, and for that, it is also kind of training for for the public teachers. Maybe not just focusing with the Filipino, but also in general case since we are amidst pandemic. Next one, the regional director, upon consultation with his superintendents, supervisors, principals, teachers, and other sectors of the community, shall formulate a program to start the implementation of the revised bilingual policy in all levels and school year 1987 to 1988. Like what I've said, this policy or this constitution started way back 1987. So, uh, people from the authority on that day really did what this guideline said, because we are having it up to the present time. The guidelines that they implemented last 1987 lasted up to this present time. And those are the things that we are also following up to this present time, and also maybe for you in the present or in the future time that you will be teaching also. There is some revision maybe, but I think we will be still following the bilingual education policy. Next is in non-Tagalog areas, the regional director shall organize compensatory programs in order to equalize competence in Filipino among Tagalog and non-Tagalogs through the development of suitable teaching materials, training of special teachers, offering of additional classes, and establishment of incentives for teachers in Filipino. For the Tagalog areas, the an enrichment program for enhancing competence in the language shall likewise be organized. Like what I've said, teachers still do need to have information about different languages. Like our students, maybe their native tongue is really not the pure Tagalog, no, or they do have still their own dialect, and also how can they uh, teach or do what they preach if they really don't know the policy or they really don't know the language itself. And once again, it is part of the government responsibility to provide something for our teachers, and most especially for the public teachers. And this is also for the improvement and development of the way they teach or the way they're going to teach the students in their region or in their places. So still, again, once again, teaching is an endless learning profession. So that's it. This is for this guidelines or this guideline. Next one, the levels of competence set as goals for both Filipino and English shall be set by the department according to the levels and needs of the population and periodically revised. For example, every 6 years. And for this one, no, for this guideline, since we are already talking about the needs and the revision for this policy, it really depends on the needs of the students. For example, your place or your region really need to have higher learning about the Tagalog language or Filipino language, and then for the other teachers, there is a need for the English language, and then we still need to level the competence that we are setting for each school that we are handling. For example, those schools from Mindanao really have to focus with the Filipino language, since they do still have broad use of their own dialect. On the other hand, in our place or in our region, region 4A, we just need to focus on learning the English language, since we are already familiar with our native tongue. But still, there are pros and cons by not focusing on our native tongues because, for example, in our case, we have to forget the balarila Filipino or the balarilang Filipino that we are having, or likewise, and US or those Americans really don't focus with their grammar because they're used to have their English as the English as their native language. Likewise with us here from region 4A. But then again, these guidelines focus on the different competences that we need to imply into different regions that we are having in our country. Once again, the diversity of language or dialects we do have in our country really matter. Next one, the transfer of cognitive and linguistic skills from one language to another shall be facilitated and reflected in the syllabi of the schools. For example, in our case, in higher education, we do have the syllabi, or you are already familiar with the syllabus that each of your teacher must, or each of your instructor must presented before the semester starts. But in the case of secondary and elementary, they do have what we call the curriculum that they are following. And for this case, in following the bilingual education policy, we need to have a good connection of cognitive and linguistic skills from one language to another, because like what we had na I already mentioned the translation. What if the meaning of the word suffer, and then it will not be a successful transfer of information, or again, uh, the purpose will be defeated because there is no connection of cognitive and linguistic skills from one language to another. We need to bear that in our minds. And once again, that's why it is part of the syllabi or the curriculum of the schools, is because to generalize the learning process that we are giving to each of our students. And it is very important because the general information that they are getting or that they are obtaining is important, because that is what their foundation will be coming from. That is the learning that they will be using in the future or in their different choice of careers. So we need to bear that in our minds as educators, because our students will suffer if we will not have the proper transfer of this or of the learning to our students. Once again, this is part of our responsibility to generalize this learning that our students need. Next one is, in the measurement of the achievement nationwide, consideration shall be given to regional differences because of varieties of Filipino and variations in the phasing in of the languages. Regional evaluation shall be undertaken to gauge the attainment of standards set for quality education. Like what I've said a while ago, those schools from Mindanao and from our region, Region 4A, may differ. And of course, also with the measurement of achievement. There are points to consider, there are different points need to consider because of the differences per region. Once again, we can't have we can have one set of evaluation sheet or assessment in our different schools from our country, because we do have still the differences. That's why the evaluation or the regional evaluation shall be undertaken under the gauge the attainment of the standards set for quality education. It will not be set as one, or it must not be uh, a set of one assessment for our country because of the differences and variation in language use. Next is minimum standards of language skills in both Filipino and English shall be required for the promotion of the students. Once again, we are promoted to grade from grade 1 to grade 2, grade 2 to grade 3, and moving up or leveling up is because of the standards that we obtain from the language skills that we are needed. So there are points or there are cases that some students from primary level cannot be promoted to different levels because they still didn't pass the minimum standards of language skills. They can still comprehend Filipino stories, they can still read English stories, and the likes. That's why it is the reason why they cannot be promoted into another level. Again, this is for their own sake. That's why they need to really learn the languages that our country do is using. For this case, It is both Filipino and English. Next one is Department of Education, Culture and Sports, or the DEX, and now is DepEd, shall coordinate the following activities for the implementation of the revised language policy through its respective agencies. So what are those activities that are implemented for this language policy? The first one is revision of pre-service teacher training courses to reflect the bilingual education policy. Once again, there are seminars that must be given to the teachers so that we can or they can really transfer the knowledge that the students are needing. Next, development of a program to train teachers to use Filipino as a medium of instruction for content subjects. Okay, it is self-explanatory. Next one is certification of teachers for language and content competence, including those who have been teaching in Filipino with success. Again, this is teachers' motivation in teaching. Okay, if they really do have this one. Next one, admission to training of future teachers with required language competence. This is for you. You may be known for this with your third year or fourth year level. And then lastly, development of evaluative instruments for teachers and pupils for gauging language and content competence using various skills. Once again, this is for teachers and students. There must be evaluation conducted. Next one is under this policy number one, the department shall appoint a bilingual education committee to be composed of the following. So for this part, we will be talking about the committee under the BEP or bilingual education policy because they are the ones behind this policy or they're still the one uh, controlling this order from our government. First one is the bureau directors from elementary, secondary, and tertiary. Next one is the chairperson of the national language. Third is commission or the Institute of the Philippine Languages. Next one, representatives from the language education. Lastly, sector and language societies. So the chairman of this committee shall be designated by the secretary, of course, the secretary of the Department of Education. Next one, the representatives shall serve for a period of 3 years, renewable at the option of the secretary. And then also, the secretariat shall be housed in the same office as the chairperson. So this is under the organization of this policy. And then for this time, let's identify some of the individuals under this committee. First one are the bureau directors from elementary, from secondary, and from tertiary. So from elementary, we do have Dr. Teresita Grafilo Inchong, a doctor of education and doctor of, if I'm not mistaken, is uh, Trick medicine. And for the secondary, we do have Director Jocelyn D.R. Andaya. And then lastly, for the tertiary, as Bureau Director, we do have Attorney Cinderella Filipina S. Betines Haro, appointed by our President Rodrigo Duterte. And then for the next one, the chairperson of the national language, we do have Mr. Virgilio S. Almario. So he is very profound in our Filipino language literary pieces. O sa panitikang Filipino, kilalang kilala po si Mr. Virgilio because he is an author, poet, and the likes, no? And kilala din siya sa Komisyong Pambansa ng Lengguaheng Filipino natin. And then other task of this committee is first task of this shall be the dissemination of information on the bilingual education policy among other departments of the Republic and among government and non-government agencies and the public at large. Of course, part din siya, kaya din siya nasa curriculum natin because this committee included this subject into your curriculum, into your syllabi. Kaya po, at your level, I am here teaching BSEE 25 is because of this guidelines or because of this policy under BEP. Okay? So, hindi naman din ako mag-effort para sa inyo no kung hindi nyo kailangan itong guidelines na ito. Next task is the committee shall present an annual report of its activities and findings to the secretary. Next, it shall compile baseline data on achievement in both languages for future use. Lastly, periodically, with the help of the research agencies, it shall conduct a commission evaluation studies on the implementation of the policy and suggest revisions of the policy. It should undertake a summative evaluation after 10 years implementation. This is the first one, no? This is the first summative evaluation, 1987 to 1997, and then 1997 to 2007, and then up to present, okay? Up to maybe 2027. Okay, since they need to give summative evaluation every 10 years. Okay, and we still have this for our future use. Of course, once again, this policy and other policies that came from our government must be reviewed occasionally, and then if there's a need for revision, we must put revision to each policy that our government is giving, no, for our own sake then. And the last two policy under the implementation of the bilingual education are: second, this order supersedes previous orders on bilingual education policy implementing guidelines, except those that are not inconsistent with this order. This is like what I've said, no? Yung ikot ng ating order or ng ating mga policies ay ganyan. So we need to accept it, we need to revise it, we need to enrich it up to its maximum level for our own sake. And then lastly, this order takes effect in the school year 1987 to 1988 up to this future or up to our present time right now. This is what we are following. This is what we do have into our curriculum or syllabi right now. This is what we are following. Okay, this started last 1987, school year 1987 to 1988, up to this moment. The reference of this presentation is the Department Orders number 25, series of 1974, and number 50, series of 1975, under the Dex Order number 52, series of 1987. So, for this lesson, lesson 3, I hope we can grasp each policies and guidelines that this presentation is giving. Once again, this is for the sake of our future endeavors or our future paths that we are going, since we are educators and as English majors, we need to follow also this guidance. We are the first one who need to follow these policies and guidelines. And for this lesson, that will be all. Thank you very much for listening. Once again, I am Miss Glofelin D. Baes, your instructor for this subject. Thank you.